In the serene heart of the West African savanna, wrapped by thick groves of iroko and baobab trees, nestled the village of Kuru. It was a land where morning songs of birds merged with the chants of mothers pounding yam, and where the red earth held the secrets of ancestors. Kuru was not just a village, it was a living embodiment of ancient customs. Among these customs, one stood tallest, the purity of maidens. A girl's virtue was her family's honor, and a woman's chastity until marriage was sacred. Kuru's people revered tradition like breath. Elders told tales around moonlit fires, invoking proverbs like, "He who waters the roots does not fear the withering of the leaves." And the root, in their belief, was the virtue of their daughters. Fathers boasted in the evening square, "My daughter is pure, untouched like the morning dew on kola leaves." Mothers taught their girls from the time they could walk that their body was a sacred trust and that to give it before marriage was to shame the ancestors. But change crept silently, like a snake through dry grass. Her name was Isime. She arrived during the festival of New Yam, when drummers beat their rhythms loud and the air smelled of roasted maize in celebration. She was the niece of Mama Ibekwe, one of the respected traders in the village. Isime was from the city, Lagos they said, where lights never slept, and women wore confidence like perfume. She was stunning, adorned in flashy clothes that shimmered like the scales of river spirits. Her skirts were short, her tops clung to her body like second skin, and she walked with the grace of someone who knew the power in her hips. The villagers stared. Men paused mid-conversation when she passed, their eyes lingering. Young girls giggled behind palms, whispering, mimicking her walk. "See how she moves like a queen," murmured Ngozi, daughter of the local blacksmith. "She's fearless," said another. "I want to dress like her." But not everyone was charmed. Old women clucked their tongues. They muttered, casting wary glances at the girl who smiled too much, who looked men in the eye, who didn't kneel to greet her elders. Yet Isime didn't seem to notice, or care. At first, her influence was subtle. A group of girls began to tie their wrappers higher. They asked their mothers for colored lip balms. They began to whisper about the world beyond Kuru, about Lagos, about being seen, wanted, admired. Ashabi, the chief's middle daughter, was the first to fall under the spell. She had grown up within the circle of tradition. Her father, Chief Dangana, was the custodian of Kuru's laws. Her mother had trained her in the customs, how to cook with humility, how to carry herself with grace, how to protect her purity like a golden calabash. But Ashabi felt a longing she could not explain. Isime seemed to glow with a power that made men offer gifts without demand. That power was intoxicating. One afternoon, hiding behind palm fronds near the market, Ashabi saw Isime with Mr. Bako, a merchant known for his lecherous eyes. Isime laughed at his jokes, placed a hand on his chest, and walked away minutes later with a small pouch heavy with coins. Ashabi's heart pounded. So that's her secret, she thought. That evening, the village seemed different. She looked at the men differently, not as fathers or uncles, but as keys to something bigger. She wanted the admiration Isime received, the fine fabrics, the attention. So when a young traveler named Musa looked at her too long at the riverbank, Ashabi smiled back. A week later, Ashabi had new earrings, then shoes, then a small mirror from the city. She told her closest friends, not in shame but with giddy pride. "It's easy," she whispered. "You just have to make them feel special. Isime is right. We've been blind." The flame spread. Soon more girls followed suit. Isime noticed, and like a spider sensing movement in her web, she acted. She became their coordinator. "Let me speak for you," she told them. "I'll protect you, but you must be loyal." They agreed. The meetings became routine. The men, traders, visitors, even a few married locals, were eager. They came with trinkets, money, favors. The girls, and once shy and obedient, became bold, lacing their innocence with seductive smiles. But their actions were wrapped in secrecy. By day, they swept compounds and fetched water, sang songs at the well, and danced at village festivals. By night, they lived a life hidden beneath the weight of ancestral expectations. The gods watched. They always do. But the villagers were blind. They continued to boast. "Our daughters are untouched," said Elder Onanuju. "Kuru girls are not like those in the city." And so the ground beneath Kuru cracked quietly. Until one day the gods answered. It began with the crops. Maize stalks turned gray before their time, cassava roots withered, and the yams refused to grow fat. The rivers ran slower, and fish, once abundant, vanished. Then came the illness. Children cried through the night with burning fevers. Goats gave birth to stillborns. The village was cursed. The elders gathered in the chief's courtyard, kneeling before the great oracle, Agbaji, whose eyes had seen the unseen. "The gods are angry," he pronounced after long chants and divination bones scattered on goatskin. "The sacred trust of this village has been broken. Purity has been lost. To lift the curse, 2 virgin maidens must carry the sacrifice to the altar of Odanla before the next moonrise." Gasps filled the air. Murmurs raced like wildfire. Virgin maidens? But this was Kuru. Weren't all the girls pure? The town crier rang his bell at dawn. "All maidens to the palace! Come with your parents! The gods demand sacrifice!" The square filled with girls in their finest wrappers, eyes wide, parents standing tall with pride. They believed the test was mere formality. Their daughters were virtuous, weren't they? Agbaji stepped forward holding a carved pot, its surface painted with ancient glyphs. Inside lay a necklace blessed by the gods, a charm that would only respond to the touch of a true virgin. "One by one," Agbaji commanded, "let the pot reveal the truth." The first girl stepped forward, dipped her trembling hand into the pot, and found nothing. The second, the third, nothing. A hush fell over the crowd. Mothers frowned, fathers stood straighter. Then came Ashabi. The chief's daughter wore a proud look, her head held high. The chief nodded approvingly from the royal stool. She reached in. Her face fell. Her hand came up empty. Gasps. Then her sisters, one after the other. Nothing. A frenzy broke out. The whispers turned to accusations. "How can this be? My daughter has never left home. The gods must be testing us further." Then a voice shouted, clear and piercing, "It's because of her, Isime." All heads turned. "She brought the city into our village," someone cried. "She taught them to dress like harlots. She led them to shame." Isime, standing by the well, froze. In that moment, the admiration vanished. She was no longer a symbol of beauty or power. She was the serpent in the garden. The men who had once smiled at her turned away. Mothers shielded their daughters. The truth was out. The girls were not pure. The tradition had been broken. The gods were wrathful. Agbaji lifted his staff. "Without purity, the gods will not accept our offering. If no virgins are found within a day, the curse will deepen, and Kuru will fall." And in the wind, the ancestors wept. Night fell heavily over Kuru. It was not the kind of night filled with the sounds of crickets and owls, nor the scent of roasting palm kernels or simmering okra. This night was dense with silence, a silence that screamed, a silence that accused. It seeped into huts and pressed down on sleeping mats. Mothers stared blankly at their daughters. Fathers walked the compounds with clenched fists and lowered heads. The village was bleeding, not from war or disease, but from something worse, shame. No virgin had passed the pot's test, not even one. The very foundation of Kuru's identity had cracked, and at the center of the wound stood Isime. She remained locked inside Mama Ibekwe's hut. Outside, angry voices rose like a swarm. People called her a witch, a seductress, a plague sent by city devils. Mama Ibekwe, once respected for her market savvy, sat in her doorway weeping. She had brought this girl. She had unknowingly opened the gate to ruin. Inside, Isime stood at the window staring out. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from disbelief. How had it gone this far? She hadn't come to destroy. She came to escape, to rest. Lagos had worn her down, a life of chasing and running, of men who wanted pieces of her soul. In Kuru, she had been adored. For once, she felt powerful. The girls clung to her like a savior. She had only shown them how to take control, to own themselves. But now that power had turned to poison. A stone hit the wall, then another. Shouts followed, "Bring her out!" She must confess. Let the gods deal with her. Chief Dangana emerged on his veranda, regal and grim. His daughter Ashabi sat beside her mother, eyes empty. The chief raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Enough, he boomed. Tomorrow at sunrise, Isime shall appear before the shrine. Let the gods speak. The people murmured, then dispersed reluctantly. The next morning, the village gathered before the great shrine of Odanla, god of judgment and balance. The sacred grove was shrouded in mist, and the carved idol loomed with cold majesty. Isime, dressed in a plain wrapper, walked barefoot to the clearing, flanked by 2 elders. Her head was bowed. Agbaji stood waiting, pot in hand. You have brought disgrace upon this land, he said. The girls followed your ways. You made them sell what was sacred. Isime raised her head. I never forced anyone. They followed me because they were curious, because your rules have made them prisoners. Gasps. Chief Dangana stepped forward, fury in his voice. You speak before the gods and still insult our ways? Isime's voice cracked. I only wanted to feel seen, to help them feel seen. You teach your girls silence, obedience, but never how to live. Agbaji raised the pot. The gods will judge. He gestured for her to place her hand inside. Isime inhaled, stepped forward, and dipped her hand in. Seconds passed. The pot remained still. Then it glowed faintly. A flicker, a pulse. Agbaji's eyes widened. He reached inside and pulled out the sacred necklace. The crowd gasped. She is pure? Someone whispered. A stunned silence fell. She? Ashabi muttered. Agbaji looked dazed. The gods confirm her virtue. The entire village exploded in confusion. How can that be? She was the leader. She corrupted our daughters. She bewitched the pot. But Chief Dangana raised his staff. Silence! Agbaji stared at Isime, now trembling. You never joined them, did you? Isime shook her head, eyes filled with tears. I watched them, I taught them, but I never crossed the line. I knew that if I did, I would be lost forever. She turned to Ashabi. You all thought I was free, but I lived in chains too. I envied your peace, your simplicity, but you envied my illusion. Ashabi turned her face away. The chief's voice rang out. The gods have judged. Isime is clean, but our daughters are not. He looked across the crowd. This is no longer her shame. It is ours. The shame was now communal. Weeks passed. The curse lingered. Though the truth had been laid bare, the gods remained silent. Rain refused to fall. The crops struggled, livestock died in clusters, and the people, humbled and afraid, finally understood the weight of what had been lost. Agbaji called for cleansing, not just of bodies, but of hearts, and so began the Festival of Atonement. The girls, Shabi, Ngosi, and the others, were stripped of their ornaments and dressed in sackcloth. For 7 days they lived apart from the village, fasting and meditating by the sacred stream. Each day they washed in silence, praying for forgiveness from the ancestors. Isime joined them, not by command but by choice. She tended to the younger girls, fed the sick, helped grind cassava. She no longer walked with the swagger of city boldness, but with a quiet dignity that humbled even her critics. On the 7th day, the girls were led into the square. A great bonfire burned at the center. Agbaji, robed in white, approached them with a calabash of goat's blood and herbs. One by one, he anointed their foreheads. Then he turned to the crowd. The gods demand not just confession, but change. Who among you will lead these girls back to purity? Silence. Then Mama Ibekwe stepped forward. I will. And behind her, the mothers of the fallen daughters joined. Together, they formed a circle around the girls, chanting softly. It was not a song of praise. It was a song of mourning. For innocence lost, for the breaking of sacred trust. But within it, there was hope. That night, the rain came. It fell in sheets, drenching the earth, the huts, the people. Children danced naked in the mud. Men raised their hands to the skies. The curse had broken, but something deeper had shifted too. Kuru no longer boasted. No more empty proclamations about our daughters are pure. They had learned that silence breeds decay, that virtue is not maintained through fear, but through understanding. Ashabi and her peers began to teach the younger girls not just about chastity, but about self-worth. They told the truth about temptation, about consequence, about shame and healing. Isime stayed. She opened a small school for girls where tradition met wisdom. She taught them how to write, how to speak boldly but respectfully, how to navigate the world beyond Kuru without losing their roots. Years later, when people spoke of the fall and rise of Kuru, they remembered Isime, not as the girl who brought ruin, but the flame that revealed rot and then sparked renewal. Under the shade of the great Iroko tree, elders would point and say, "That is where Kuru died and where it was reborn." And the wind would whisper through the leaves, "What fire destroys, truth can restore."